Okay, so the Burb of Justice, aka Not a Panther, has requested the top 5 sieges in Warhammer by Majorkill, featuring Baldermort. Now, I look at both of these guys, and I enjoy both the kinds of content that they put out. I fully expect Vrax is definitely going to be on here. Hell's Reach, Hades, and definitely Terra. But we'll see what the 5th one's going to be. Here we go.
G'day guys and gal. Today we have something a little bit special. As we know, Majorkill has done a good job of not making many friends in the Warhammer YouTube community, so the collabs have been basically non-existent. What can I say, I'm a quality over quantity kind of guy when it comes to the people I have available to me. Speaking of quality, this video is made in collaboration with Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer.
Welcome. Baldermort here to lend a bit of gravitas to a very weighty subject indeed. Eager to get into this grisly subject matter. Enough from me. Leon Macduff.
Now Baldermort has the voice of a sexy cinematic demon, and I for one am glad to add a bit of good production and professionalism to one of my videos for once, so I'm very excited for this. Today we'll be looking at our top 5 picks for Warhammer 40k sieges. Sieges are a nasty thing that often end in love, death and rainbows, so I for one am keen to talk about them. Take it away, Baldy.
The history of war has always been one of pain and suffering, frustration and fear. The never-ending clash of ever-increasingly lethal arms. One might believe that in the 39th millennia we, Homo sapiens, would have set aside such things, such horrors. Yet in humanity's distant future, the bleak landscape of the 41st millennium, this tradition of tragedy and waste has only become honed to a razor's edge.
Pretty much.
Humanity has almost lost all of its vestiges of virtue, but not of valor. For there are few who can match the courage of the military of the Imperium of mankind. But even their fanatical ardor for battle has its limits.
Yes.
In all of the arenas and theaters of war, there can be no greater test of courage, resilience, and resolve than that most horrific, most bitter mode of confrontation of all. Siege warfare. A truly vile experience for both sieging and besieged forces.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try this. Let's see if I'm right about this. Siege of Terra, Vrax, Hell's Reach, Hades, Iron Cage.
Each day that an army is denied entrance, their rage grows. But as such, with each day that the army stands outside the walls and starves the inhabitants and slings horror at and over its walls, the bitterness of the defenders rises. For a siege is more a trial of will than arms alone, and no form of confrontation is as bitter, costly, or as terrible as the dreaded siege.
Oh yeah, I'm just tingling to the immersion right now.
Preparing to smash out of the closet and festoon yourself with sequins, old chap?
You're just mad that I have more chicks watching my videos than yours.
Well, if you change your mind and visit Blighty, I can introduce you to some very nice chaps. Think on it. Not my cup of tea, but live and let live, as I always say.
I think I'll stay away from your saggy ball mates and their retirement village for now, but thanks for the offer. Our first siege on this list is the Siege of Doronde.
Oh, okay.
Now this siege wasn't big or impactful, it didn't include Xenos or Space Marines, the outcome had been decided before the first shot was fired, but just because it wasn't a classic Warhammer 40k showdown doesn't mean it wasn't disgustingly hilarious and well deserving for a spot on this list. Let me set the scene. The hive world of Doronde decided that taxes were for shit cunts, so they told the Imperium to lick their balls. Any Imperial agent that went to investigate got gangbanged and hung by an angry mob, hence the Imperium wasn't in the mood for their bullshit and deployed the Death Corps of Krieg.
Life is cheap in the grim darkness of the future. The trillions of human souls that make up the populace of the Imperium are but grist for the mill. Statistics that are seen as a resource to be used in the wars of the Imperium. But of all the worlds that send their men and women to die on cold and forbidding worlds, there are none akin to the Death Corps of Krieg.
Yep, that's
For
an
on
accurate
Krieg
statement.
there is but one virtue, one goal, one drive: to die in the name of the Emperor. The people of this world would gladly charge across a minefield without a second of hesitation, would mount their dead against the ramparts of their enemies' bastilles, just so they can launch their bodies over the very walls that their enemy contained within. For the cult of sacrifice rules supreme on Krieg, and their culture revolves around self-loathing for an infraction against the Imperium long ago. To this day, the sons and daughters of Krieg consider any day that they do not die for the Emperor and the Imperium to be a wasted day. In Krieg, there is a fanaticism so strong that they gladly throw their own children into the fires of war.
Oh yeah.
No standard force of the Imperium is as harsh, as fanatically driven as that of Krieg.
Yeah, like the bad thing about Krieg is you can't put their units, you cannot try to intermix their units among any other kind of guard regiment because Krieg doesn't care to be diplomatic towards anyone about anything. In fact, they might argue with the Macabrian Janissaries over who is the more zealous regiment at this point. They are just wow when it comes down to it. I think the only ones that could possibly get along with the Death Corps Kree in close quarters would probably be the Morty and Iron Guard, but that's because both of them share similar ideas of discipline. The Morty and Iron Guard just does it a lot better in truth. But as far as fanaticism and duty, they both share very similar ideas.
For they have not one scrap of mercy for any foe of the Imperium, be they Xenos or rebel human. In Krieg there is nothing but devotion, sacrifice, and death in the name of the Emperor.
The Death Corps set up camp next to the primary hive and simply just started shelling the living shit out of it, shooting anyone that tried to escape the molested city.
Like a rain of death that never relented, never ceased, even for an hour.
Combo.
The city was destroyed. For years, there was not 1 hour, not 1 day, where the explosives of the Death Corps did not land amongst the churches, barracks, streets, and abodes of the people of Dorondai. Relentless, implacable death was visited upon them from above, as if the wrath of the Emperor himself had visited their city and made of it his residence. Many were driven insane by the endless torrent of hate sent at them, their minds shattered so they would pray for death, a mercy that would only be found in the fires that rained on them from above.
Oh yeah.
After 5 years of non-stop death, the city offered their unconditional surrender to the Death Corps. The Death Corps were like, "That ship has sailed, I hope you enjoy the entree, but now it's time for the main meal." Hence the city was shelled again for another 5 years.
Another 3 years of this hail of horror. Not one man, woman, child, pet, rat, or even fly did move, walk, or crawl in the once proud city of Dorondai. Not 1 inch of it remained untouched, unscorched, or unblasted by the grinding bombardment from the Death Corps. Had the Death Corps relented for an instant but one, they would have seen that their labours had borne the bitter fruit that they intended. For nothing now lived in the city of Dorondai. Yet they did not, for clemency is not in their makeup. Hence the Death Corps of Krieg continued their siege and shelling of Dorondai for another 2 years. Only then did they allow but 1 day to pass to see the tally of their exertions. As the dust finally settled, a silence that had not been experienced for all of those years now descended onto the city that was now turned into a grave. Dorondai was gone.
Lesson of the day: pay your fucking taxes. Our next siege on...
Like seriously, the Death Corps gives zero shits. If you are a heretic, if you have done something to piss off the Emperor, they're going to inform you. They're going to inform you in the most direct way they possibly can that you have pissed off the Emperor, and at no point in the near future is there going to be anything other than a boot up your ass for it. And that's what I love about the Death Corps. They're utterly psychotic.
on this list moves away from the memes, and something closer to a bit more intensity is the Siege of Hell's Reach.
There we go.
Now, some absolute sick cunt made a full feature-length 3D rendered movie on this siege, which was incredible, but for those of us that don't have 3 hours, here's the gist of it. So we have Armageddon, which, as we've established, gets turbo fucked on the daily. It's called Armageddon after all. The Orcs especially love this planet because it always offers them a great fight, and the Imperium loves the planet because it's loaded with natural resources. The hive city of Hell's Reach was an important strategic location for the Imperium, hence they deployed some Black Templars, Titans, Salamanders, Steel Legion, and even some Sisters of Battle to defend it against an endless tide of Orcs. The best part...
Basically, there were so many... Defending Armageddon from orbit, as well as on the ground, there were at least over 100,000 Space Marines at that engagement. Maybe more, maybe a little bit less. And a formation like that hasn't been seen since pre-heresy time. There was so much used to defend Armageddon that it bordered on the ridiculous. The Black Templars, a company strength, were sent to Hell's Reach itself, which was led by, Reclusiarch Grimaldus. So 100 Black Templars. The reason they probably only sent 100 is because there was so much stuff on that planet, so many Guardsman divisions, so many Space Marine chapters, that the Inquisition was bound to be there. And the Black Templars have the most laughably concealed codex violations of any chapter known, period. With the only exception probably being the Space Wolves, because, frankly, the Inquisition can't really tell the Space Wolves anything at this point.
Part of it is that all the Imperium soldiers, despite having such a vast defense, knew they were all going to die, yet they still fought on.
I will die on this world. I cannot tell where this conviction comes from. What either birthed it is a mystery to me.
What the fuck are you talking about? Cut the shit and get on with it, Baldy.
Sorry, bad habit. Sorry. Right, Hell's Reach. To the Imperium at large, Armageddon was a jewel without compare. Its production facilities churned out essentials upon which much of the Imperium relied. So when an armada of Orc vessels larger than any seen since the Beast arrived, the Imperium scrambled every available force for light years around, desperate to forge a defense to keep the Greenskins at bay. Despite having the largest Astartes fleet mustered since the times of the Crusade, on the Orcs came. After fierce and valiant void conflict, the Orc armada overwhelmed the combined Imperial fleets and forced them to retreat or be destroyed.
Yeah, in the book Hell's Reach, it was the largest fleet of Orcs that had been seen in the Imperium since the War of the Beast. And then, once they were convinced that fleet was the only fleet, 2 more of equal size appeared on either side of the system. It was not exactly a good time.
Thus was the planet left to look to its own defences. The newly raised Reclusiarch, Grimaldus of the Black Templars, was left to defend the hive city of Hell's Reach. At his disposal were its complement of the 101st Iron Legion, a mere handful of his brother Templars, and elements of Legio Invigilata, the Titans and veritable lords of war. The skies were soon thick with the attack transports of the Xenos scum. Each one that half crashed, half landed on the planet was filled to overbrimming with hordes of the Greenskin. What followed was a siege the likes has rarely been seen before. The teeming masses of the Orc went from the very walls of Hell's Reach to the horizon. So vast were their numbers that their dead were used as ramparts to gain purchase on the very walls of Hell's Reach. Not one man or woman who wore the colours of the 101st Iron Legion did anything less than their furious best. They fired and fired, each shot killing one of the myriad assailants. The Black Templars were everywhere, rushing from one hotspot to the next, without respite, without reprieve, for even a second. Wherever the Orcs threatened to break through in numbers, it was only the black-clad Knights of Dawn that repulsed them. The Templars' bolters ran hot with their shooting. Their weapons ran thick with the green gore of countless thousands of greenskins they slew. They were indefatigable, but they were simply too few. Despite the courage of the Iron Legion and the tireless slaughter unleashed by the black-clad Sons of Dawn, even the temporary assistance of some salamanders, one segment after another of the defenses were overrun and its defenders slaughtered. The circle was closing, and each new onrush of the baying orcs diminished the defenders in number and ground.
Hold on a second. I thought I saw Lorgar's greatest fear.
Each new onrush of the baying orcs diminished the defenders in number and ground. Despite the intervention of even the god machines of the Legio Invigilata, destroying orc gargants and sizing their hordes like the manifestations of death, they were not to last. The orcs could not be stopped.
A big reason why Hell's Reach has a special place in my heart is that it shows just how terrifying the orcs really are. Often orcs are massacred like dogs to show off the strength of the other factions, and have almost descended into like a meme-like state where no one takes them seriously, so it's really cool to see them break apart the Imperial forces. The ending of Hell's Reach honestly gave me goosebumps, but my artistic ass can't do it justice, so Baldy, help me out.
The defences had crumbled, and finally, the Reclusiarch and what little remained of the defenders of Hell's Reach were forced to choose the site of their last stand. While the Steel Legion fought a staged retreat through the cemetery towards the cathedral at the very heart of the city, the Greenskin horde charged ever on into their fire. Each guardsman shot down more than one of his foes on the way in, but when an orc struck the mortal lines, it would hack or slash at least 2 guardsmen to pieces. The odds were in the favour of the orcs. Under cover of fire from the Templars and the Sisters of Battle, the Iron Legion remnants entered the cathedral itself. The orcs used concentrated fire from their armoured transports outside and tore a wall of the cathedral down in their desperation to get to the heroes within. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Sororitas, Steel Legion and his own Astartes, Reclusiarch Grimaldus fought like a true son of Dawn, an exemplar of the Black Templars. Onwards the orcs charged into their fire, met them chopper to chainsword, amongst a nearing mountain, a blast radius of orc dead. One by one, the gallant defenders fell. About to drown in a sea of greenskins, finally the battle was decided, but not by either party, orc or Astartes, as the mighty erection itself, the cathedral, fell down about their ears. But the defenders had done their job. They had held long enough, despite the terrible tithe of blood and woe exacted from them. And the firestorm season struck. And as such, the siege was ended. Hell's Reach had stood.
Fortunately, Grimaldus somehow survived that mess, so there's that. Bolter Porn is cool, sure, but having a list of sieges that involve the Imperium can be a bit tedious, so I'm glad we have this gem to break it all up. The Siege of Liandon. Once again, the Eldars' arrogance leads to their downfall. Liandon had just won a costly war against Chaos and exiled its legendary Prince Uriel for being too reckless. Eldrad, being able to see the future and also one of the only people in the universe who could grasp common sense, was like, yo bitches.
Eldrad, common sense. Please elaborate.
Massive Tyranid Hive Fleet is going to eat your ass soon if you don't leave. And Liandon was like, get your bitch ass out of here, as they had just beaten a small Tyranid fleet before, so they thought they could handle the next one easy. Spoilers, they didn't.
No.
Iandon had ever been the mightiest of the Eldar craft worlds in numbers and materials of war. So it was that they felt invulnerable, adequate to rise to any threat. How wrong they were. When their scouts and seers finally encompassed the magnitude of the threat, they swallowed their pride and let out a clarion call across the stars to any and all of the craft worlds that had fought alongside them over the years since the fall. And in the days that followed, the webway gates of Iandon were rarely inactive. From Baltan the warlike, great throngs of Aspic warriors came. From Samehon the proud, many a Wild Rider clan came. From Ulthway and other craft worlds, the Eldar came arrayed in the panoply of war. The bone singers of Iandon went hoarse with their ululations of making, enhancing the defences of their craft world again and again and again. The dead were awoken, and the greatest sin was enacted, for the very dead of the craft world were harnessed to Wraithbone and entreated to fight the oncoming scourge as they had done in life. But the hunger of the Tyranids would not be denied. On they came, wave after wave, each of increasing magnitude, each of increasing fury. The fleets of Yandam fought with the fires of old, but it was not enough, and they were swept away. Each wave of Tyranids bleeding their numbers despite the skills of the crew. So it was that the Tyranids made landfall on the ancient decks of Iandan and moved ever onwards, their numbers inexhaustible. They ground down the aspects of Bartan. They slew the Wild Rider clans of Samhan. They devoured the forces of each craft world as they separated them in tides of flesh until there were mere shrinking islands of hope that were overwhelmed and snuffed out one by one.
They use every trick in the book: Wraith constructs, the Avatar of Cain, Harlequins, Farseers, the whole shebang, and every trick in the book worked a treat, but it just didn't matter. Every wave that the Tyranids sent was bigger than the last, so it didn't matter if Cain was one-shotting Carnifexes when there was 100 to take its place. The Avatar got torn to shreds after he issued a challenge to the Hive Tyrant. The Tyrant was a dick, so he just commanded his tide of Tyranids to gangbang the Avatar instead.
It was then, beyond all hope, that the message sent by the Seer Council to their wayward son was answered. Like the living embodiment of Caleb and Chicane, Prince Iriel, the exiled son, returned and brought his mighty fleet in tow and struck down all before him. Iriel's fleet, commanded by the most gifted admiral to grace the race since the fall, went about their bloody work with abandon. With targeted strikes, they danced the waltz of death with the Nid and brought their ships low, dissecting them with the fires of their beams and evading the sluggish counterstrikes from their Tyranid fleet. Soon the way was clear to the craft world, the stars all but wiped clean of the influence of the Tyranid, so wrathful and expert was the onrush of Iriel's Corsair fleet. So did Iriel himself alight on the home from which he had been banished. For it was then that he went to the inner sanctum of Iandan and took up the fated Spear of Twilight. In doing so he forfeited his very soul, for the weapon was fey and would consume his fire as it brought his enemies low. But bring them low it did, for such was its power in the hands of a warrior of the caliber of the exiled son. Iriel strode forth and carved a bloody pathway to the Hive Tyrant, who acted as puppet master to the Tyranid hordes, and thus did Iriel strike it down with all of his wrath. In so doing, he took from the Tyranids their drive, their slave master, and they were reduced to the base beasts they truly are. From there it was child's play for the remaining forces of Iandan, led by their baleful lord, to drive the Tyranids before them, and then slaughter them to the least and the last. Iandan had been redeemed by Iriel. Its light still shone, but it had been dimmed.
Despite the victory, 90% of Liandon had been killed, causing a weird psychic effect that resulted in a lot of the ship becoming this weird, mind-bending, like afterlife, full of ghosts and shit. Also, a large population of the ship are now Wraith Guards and Wraith Lords, who have chosen to remain active and protect the ship, instead of returning to their slumber-like state like they normally would. I really think the Siege of Liandon was the perfect representation of both Eldar and the Tyranids. The Eldar used their intelligence and prowess to defeat the Tyranids, however their pride almost wiped them out. Despite their loss, I also think the Tyranids were done justice, and properly represented as the endless tide that they are, almost destroying a craft world, especially a legendary one such as Liandon. It takes a massive effort. Now ever since Lehman snapped Magnus's spine and made him an angry vegetable, the big red cunt has been looking for ways to destroy Fenris. He's been given a good couple cracks, almost doing damage but always being defeated and driven off.
Okay, so craft worlds. Craft worlds, if you have no idea what they are massive continent-sized ships that basically contain the remainder of the Eldar people. How they were dumb enough to allow a craft world to get hit up by the Tyranids is just another Eldar thing. The Eldar are anything but stupid when it comes to self-preservation. At any point something bad has happened in 40k, you can blame an Eldar for it, for the most part. You can blame the Eldar for Angron. You can blame the Eldar for the Horse Heresy. You can blame the Eldar for Armageddon. Well, you can only blame one Eldar for those last two. Any case, go moving on.
Off. Hence, at the end of the 41st millennium, Magnus teamed up with large swathes of chaos and launched a fuck-huge invasion of the star system, simultaneously attacking each planet.
With the Lord of Worlds away, the Chaos Legions did play. To Midgardia, they sent forces of Nurgle, who spread his foul feculent vapours over most of the world and slowly suffocated and twisted all there, from the highest to the lowest. On Valdermani, Tzeentch began his assault and began to influence and then dominate the peoples of that moon, its astropathic choir the main target. On mighty Frostheim, the Alpha Legion played merry hell, linking with the demons that were marching out of a rift on that world. They assailed near all of the abodes of the worlds in quick succession. All the while, their dark sorceries then went on to open rifts across the entire system.
Logan was away gathering some Wolfen, so Fenris did not have its fairy commander during the initial invasion. See, the Wolfen were very resistant to chaos, and Logan believed them to be the key to bringing back Wolf Daddy, hence he was collecting them. This wouldn't be a good old-fashioned tit-snitch siege if it didn't have some trickery, hence a changeling was planted on a nearby Dark Angel's fleet in order to turn them against the Space Wolves by revealing the existence of the Wolfen and other clues that hinted towards a total Space Wolf collapse to chaos.
It was to this banquet of woe that the Lord of Wolves returned. His ire was matchless, as he received hail upon hail, calls for aid from every single strong place that remained defiant against the forces of corruption. Long did the Lord of Wolves fight, his battle brothers cut into many packs and confronting evil on every ground that they had besmirched. On Frostheim, the wolves fell on the Alpha Legion and their never-born allies, like whirlwinds of wrath. On Valdermani, they landed to confront the influence there. But on Midgardia, no headway could be made, and it was with a heavy heart that Exterminatus was decreed and then performed.
With Logan spanking most of the system back into control, the final battle on Fenris had commenced. However, the totally 100% never had any traitors or issues loyalist Dark Angels arrived into the system and began bombing Fenris as a mercy killing, thinking they were putting the chaotically raped Space Wolves out of their misery. The Grey Knights arrive and see the Changeling and are like, yo Dark Angels, that thing is a spawn of chaos, why the fuck are you bombing the Space Wolves? And the Dark Angels are like, and begin a cat and mouse chase of the Changeling. Magnus, the fucking nerd, was summoned.
I gotta rewind that.
Why the fuck are you bombing the Space Wolves? And the Dark Angels are like, and begin a cat and mouse chase of the Changeling. Magnus, the fucking nerd, was summoned into real space and severely accelerated climate change on Fenris, hoping to magic the world so hard that it exploded.
Alas, he was a Primarch, not just a demon, and his power was great. Magnus defeated some of the bravest and brightest of the Imperium, besting a plethora of Grey Knights and Dread Knights, and then, ultimate blasphemy, he slew Grandmaster Valdar Oricon himself. Not done with this, Magnus reached into the upper atmosphere and dragged down the ships there and destroyed them so the radiation of their reactors would forever blight the very air. Laughing at his victory, Magnus took the Sons of Rust too lightly. Egil Ironwolf did foray against the Crimson King, but was destroyed from his hips upward. But, armed with not just the Spear of Rust, but also the Axe of Morkai, Grimnar did such grievous wounds to the demonic Primarch that his concentration was shattered, and in that instant, the Grey Knight Purifiers overwhelmed his tethers to the Materium and banished him back into the infernal fires.
With Magnus and his book club banished, the combined forces of Ultramarines, Iron Hands, Grey Knights and Space Wolves were able to skull fuck the rest of the Chaos forces and save Fenris. Whatever was left of it at least.
Yeah.
The Grey Knights also insisted that they purge all the civilians on the planet due to them witnessing Magnus's existence. Imagine surviving warp climate change just to get clapped by some Grey Knights.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. Here we are, guys, the #1 spot, the greatest siege that Warhammer 40k has ever experienced, the Siege of Terror. Duh. Now there's quite a
Yeah, really at this point, it's like, no shit.
bit of context and setup to this siege to really show off its immensity and whatnot, so let the moist and highly penetrative voice of Baldermort set the stage.
7 years after Horus Lupercal, the War Master, raised his banners in open rebellion on Istvan V, over half a decade of horrific warfare of an intensity that put even the rang-down Xenocides to shame. With billions of humans, legions of Astartes.
How did I know he was going to know about that? How did I know he was going to know about that?
And Titans littering world after world across the Imperium. The culmination of the Horus heresy, its final act, began. The forces of the traitors were as myriad as the very stars. The sons of Horus, the World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Thousand Sons, Iron Warriors, Death Guard, were in great strength, and most of the other 4 traitor legions were represented there also. With them were millions of Imperial army, and the remains of the legions of Titans that had thrown in their lot with the War Master, all supported by the insidious powers of the Dark Mechanicum. And, it is said, over 100 houses of traitor knights.
Yeah.
Leading the forces of evil were the Primarchs Angron, Mortarion, Magnus, Fulgrim, Perturabo, and of course, the War Master himself, Horus Lupercal. But more than this, the very gates of hell were opened, and all the cohorts of evil poured from rents in space opened by the foul sorcery of the Thousand Sons. Greater demons bestrode the very ground of holy terror. The bloodthirster Kabanda, the demon prince Korvax Utterblight, some of their most mighty, but it was in their numbers, not just in their might, that was the danger. For they were as deep in the air as a swarm of locusts, and as numerous on the ground as the worms beneath our feet. There was might indeed amongst the loyalists, though. The Primarch Yagatai Khan, and his White Scars Sanguinius, and his Blood Angels, the 10,000, the Custodian Guards, the Sisters of Silence, and many millions of loyalist soldiery. Loyalist tech priests of Mars and remaining Titans, all led by the Primarch Rogel Dawn, with his Imperial fists. But compared to the numbers of the traitors, they were but a comparatively brave few, a veritable band of brothers facing all of the myriad evils of the galaxy.
Pretty much.
Not even at Alinor had this much of humanity's strength been marshaled, but this time there were no Xenos, no enemy to fight but themselves. For in this battle humanity would destroy itself. The hatred and rage on both sides was augmented by the previous 7 years of conflict. The loyalists rage at the traitors righteous and hot, the traitors salivating at the chance to make ingress into the very home of the Emperor. No more bitter conflict has been locked since the time of the war in heaven. No quarter would be offered or accepted. It was the end.
So as we can see, there is some serious shenanigans going on. Unfortunately, the new Horus Heresy series is not totally finished, so there are some details from the Siege of Terra that haven't yet been totally illuminated, but we have more than enough info to blow your minds and your loads. Horus knew that he didn't have forever to breach the Imperial Palace. G-Men, Space Wolves, as well as the Dark Angels were coming, and with those 3 legions fisting him from behind, there was no chance he was going to win, so he basically tried to blitzkrieg the shit out of it. Now that probably would have worked if he didn't account for how mentally unstable chaos makes people, hence the Emperor's Children focused their war effort on raping and eating the local population of Terra, whilst the World Eaters charged in like a Kevin at Area 51.
The moment that the traitor fleet were in range, the bombardment began.
Essentially, I don't know when this was put out, but Horus turned everything to Perturabo and then started sniffing coke off Slaaneish's dick. That's basically how this went. He was too busy. Horus was too wrapped up into the power he was getting from the Chaos Gods. He was too wrapped up in chaos to actually do anything about the siege. He turned that over to Perturabo, and Perturabo was doing the best job he could possibly do. And he would have eventually, if he didn't have like a really, really strict timetable, he would have broken the palace. That isn't even a question. He had all the resources possible to do it. But Horus was de facto in command, but not truly in command. The second that Perturabo left, essentially the entire offensive fell apart. Essentially the second that Perturabo left the Siege of Terra, it just turned into, instead of anything strategic, it became throw as much at the wall as you possibly can and see if anything's going to stick.
Bombardment began, and plasma and missiles, nuclear and chemical, rained down on the Imperial Palace and the whole of Terra. The traitors unleashed hell and maintained this assault for days. Finally, when they achieved what they set out to do, destroy as many defenses as possible, and sow discord, confusion, terror, and death, did the firing cease and the landing begin. Drop pods filled the sky, streaking towards the ground in their thousands. In mere hours, the traitor marines were amongst the streets and defenses of Terra. They massed and assaulted the two spaceports closest to the Imperial Palace, the Eternity Wall and Lionsgate spaceports. Once secured, the heavens were filled with transports filled to the brim with the mortal armies of Horus. As the forces of the traitors arrived, they again lost eye-wateringly large proportions of their men and material, as Rogel Dawn's defenses and lasers, missiles and plasma rose up to cut them from the sky in their swathes. But land in their millions they did. Rogel and Sanguinius would hold the palace. Yagatai, that lord of the fast strike and savage raid, would be deployed beyond the walls. Yagatai and his mighty White Scars would punish the traitors with swift strikes and undermine their deployment, harrying them wherever they left even a millimeter gap, a move that proved to be well made. For although Horus made his flanks unassailable, the Great Khan found a gap and punished the traitors mightily. He later retook the Liongate spaceport and turned its guns on the incoming traitors and exacted a high price from them. Yagatai did move on the Eternity port, but was repelled. All the while, he was harrying the forces of Horus. He was making sure they never had an easy time. He slew many in the name of the Emperor. Before the walls of the palace, the throng of corrupted Mechanicus, the baying soldiery and possessed demonic Astartes, Angron pushed forward. He was huge, and his inner hate was now clearly marked on his body, for he had become a demon prince, and now little remained of his previous semblance. And surrounding them all were the worst demons and minions of the warp that had been summoned. Endless tides poured forth from the warp on Terra itself, by the vile rites of the Thousand Suns. The legions of hell were almost uncountable, and so the battle was joined. Thrice were the enemy thrown back from the walls, but ever they came on. Punishment beyond count was dealt on them by the indomitable Imperial fists and their wrathful Blood Angel brothers. But the tide of numbers was inexhaustible, and they were pushed back again and again. For weeks the battle raged. Each time the traitors and their demon minions breached a barrier or defensive line, they believed it would be the last, and the will of the defenders would sour and they would run amok. Only to find that Rogel Dawn had been so very busy in the years that they had been winning battles. The overlapping fire arcs, the warrens of tunnels. But even so, they finally failed. A massed push by the enemy led to the central section of the defenders' line collapsing through attrition alone, and the way was open to the final gate into the palace's inner sanctum, the Eternity Gate. It was then that Sanguinius took up his sword and spear again and strode forth to buy time, the precious time needed for their flank forces to retreat into the inner palace. Precious time. And what a spectacle all would see that day, for in all of the annals of the human race no martial display could compare. The forces of chaos could see their goal and their hackles were up, so they threw all they had at him. Sanguinius, defending the Eternity Gate alone, gave no quarter, no ground. As the forces of chaos charged the last gate with the angel defending, they were pushed back time and time again, tens unto hundreds. He did not do this for minutes, but hours. As some of the last of the loyalists passed him, the palace itself shuddered, a footfall of such size and power that the very ground itself reverberated to its impact. A great wailing came from amongst the demons and traitors alike, a baying of oncoming victory, for one had come. To quote, a huge shape rose from amongst the army of Horus. The creature was tall, taller than any around it, and as it rose, it unfolded its great leathery wings and took to the air. It was a bloodthirster, greater demon of Khorne, the most fearsome and dangerous of the bloody god's forces. The demon flew towards Sanguinius as he recognized it instantly. Its name was Kabanda, and he had fought the creature before. Atop the ultimate gate, two mighty figures clashed in aerial combat. Both were winged. The angel's wings were pure white and shone brightly through the smoke and smog of war about. The other was a creature of nightmare, its demonic wings leathery and dark. As they wheeled about each other in the air, the warring troops below seemed to pause to watch the unfolding drama. The demon's whip stung the Primarch's wing, and he faltered in the air slightly. As he did so, the Bloodthirster grabbed him by the throat with its massive taloned fist. Sanguinius cut with his sword against the demon's flank. The beast flinched but did not release its hold. The demon then threw the Primarch down onto the gate below. The granite stonework splintered as the Primarch's body smashed into it. The traitor horde watching roared their approval. The Primarch lay still upon the broken stone as the demon landed next to him and prepared to deal the death blow. The monstrous creature threw back its head and let loose a howl of exultation. As the demon howled in triumph over him, Sanguinius drew up his last reserves of strength and power. With a massive effort, he painfully rose to face Kabanda for the last time. Sanguinius, now terrible in his aspect, lifted the carcass of the demon above his head, an arc of power dancing on his brow, as he swung the body around and hurled the broken behemoth into the midst of the demon's followers. The traitors beat their chests and wailed in dismay. The Blood Angels cheered, and the ultimate gate was shut. End quote. Thus it was that the palace was held, Rogel and Sanguinius inside, Yagatai outside. The battle had lasted 55 days, against twice their number of Primarchs, now infused with the power of the dark gods, some of them being demons unto themselves, evil augmenting their strength, with entire or part of 6 legions against a mere 3. Yet they stood for 55 days.
Despite giving it a good crack, Horus just couldn't win in time. With the ultra cheese, questionably loyal angels and spacefarers about to descend on his ass, he decided to try bait the Big E to his ship and duel him.
But Majorkill, why would the Big E go into Horus's ship when they were only hours away from reinforcements arriving and saving the day?
Hush now, Timothy. A good question, but fear not, for we shall explain all. So do be a good chap and shut up. One must remember that this entire coup, this horror, this travesty, was the machination of the corrupting powers, the dark gods of the warp. So it was that the Chaos Gods had combined their might, had shrouded the very sight of the Emperor with a warp storm that matched the power of the ruined storm itself, if not its size and import. The master of mankind, stretched as he was, could not afford the time or might to punch through the clouding of the gods to see that his deliverance was scant hours away. Without this knowledge, he had a simple decision: allow matters to progress to their ultimate conclusion, defeat, and the teeming hordes of chaos smashing down the last of the palace's defences and slaying all within, and befouling the very inner sanctum with their feculent evil, or to act. Thus it was that the Emperor, the master of mankind, took up his mighty sword and proceeded to that last doleful march unto the Teleportarum.
Nice. Yeah, so the Big E took the bait like the naughty slut he was and teleported himself, Rogel, Sanguinius, and a bunch of custodians and whatnot onto Horus's ship. Horus, being a cheeky cunt, used warp spaghetti to scatter the loyalist forces. Sanguinius found Horus first.
Long had Sanguinius known of his demise, the price that would be exacted from him at this very moment.
Okay, this is probably the only piece of artwork depicting Sanguinius and Horus that I don't really seem to, like, all I can see when I see Horus in this is the dad from The Incredibles. Now you can't unsee it just like I can't.
But also what it would lead on to. For Sanguinius was a psyker and had visions of this instant for many a long year. As a dutiful son, he entered the foul bridge of the vengeful spirit to match his strength against his erstwhile brother and comrade, Horus Lupercal, the War Master. Sanguinius was ever one of the most powerful of the Primarchs in battle, his rage only matched by his skill. but before him stood the War Master, augmented by gifts of power from each of the lying gods of evil, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. Perhaps, had he not this power, the Angel would have bested Horus, as Leman Russ had previously. But with the power of all the gods combined, Horus was almost indestructible. The two met, and their arms moved with a speed and clarity of purpose, rage and wrath that would awe even their brothers, the other Primarchs. In that last fray, Sanguinius did do damage to the armor of Horus, creating a chink in his defenses that would later prove the worth of his endeavor. But the end was unavoidable. In the last, Horus disarmed the Angel, and with his mighty hand he did grab Sanguinius by the throat and lift him up. As the Angel thrashed in his grip, it tightened, crushing his windpipe and snapping his neck. Horus, the deed done, then showed the depth of his fall, the horror of his new form, by simply discarding this, the most loved and respected of all of the sons of the Emperor, to the floor. The Angel was gone. Unto this scene, the Master of Mankind came. He witnessed firsthand the degeneration of his first found son, Horus. Where the battle with Sanguinius had been one-sided, the Emperor of Mankind met him blow for blow, but ever did he remember his son as he was, and his weakness led him to restrain his power. Horus, engorged with the power of hate, and having bested the Angel so easily, actually thought he was the greater being, and presumed he was actually toying with his sire, the Emperor. Thus it was that Horus held back nothing, and his assault left the Emperor reeling for a split second. A split second, but it was enough. Horus lashed out and cut the arm from the Emperor, and blasted his face with infernal powers, bursting one eye and searing the very flesh from his father's skull. More, then he took up a man he considered defeated and brought him down on his knee in a thunderous collision that snapped the back of the Emperor forever. It is said that at this point, a man, perhaps a custodian, some say a guardsman, entered the scene and ran to stand betwixt Horus and his prey, the seemingly shattered and defeated Emperor. Horus laughed at this act, and with a sweep of his arm and the use of his chaos-imbued powers, he destroyed that brave soul utterly. The callousness of Horus finally lifted the scales from his father's eyes, for the Emperor could find nothing left of Horus that could be saved. He marshaled his power for one final act.
He blasted his ass. Never had someone been so soul-raped before that the very essence of Horus was completely obliterated. However, in the process, the Big E had become a vegetable, and Rogel carried his broken ass to the Golden Throne, where he has been since.
Pretty much.
The outcome of the battle was a Pyrrhic victory for the Imperium, and despite us having shattered the armies of Chaos, they lost Sanguinius, and the Emperor became a massive strain on their healthcare system. Oh well, at least Horus died, so one less bold cunt to worry about. And there we have it guys, the top 5 sieges in Warhammer 40k. Now we really struggled to pick which 5 we wanted to cover as there were just so many good ones. If you guys wanted to let us know about some sieges you love, then comment down below on why you like them, and I'll make sure me and Baldermort go through the comments and see what you've got to say. Once again, a massive thank you to Baldermort for chumming on the channel. I had a lot of fun with this and I feel like we all did too.
Thanks for the invite, MK, and all of your patience. I haven't been easy to work with this time round, sorry about that. And to everybody else out there, thanks for listening, and do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.
Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Okay, so that was Baldermort and Majorkill. Vrax didn't make it on the list, which kind of surprised me, but there we go. Illusion, I can definitely see being in the top 5 of that. Siege of Terror, of course, is always going to be number 1. Hell's Reach, yeah, those are. I knew something with the Death Corps was going to wind up on there regardless, just because the Death Corps has been involved in so much stuff. But I had figured that Vrax was going to be there, but that is a different story altogether. All right. One thing I really want to see is the final confrontation in the books between the Emperor, Horus, Sanguinius, the whole 9 yards. I want to see all of that. I know it's coming, and I can't wait to read it. Past that, I'm going to put both their channels' information down below, as well as this video, everything else like that. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to recommend something, please just pop into my Discord channel and head to the Request for Reactions tab. I have a Patreon down below as well. I will catch you guys next time.